Hello, my name is Jenny Priestley. I am TPB Europe's Content Director and I am hosting today's webinar. Now, efficiency in the newsroom is imperative for broadcasters as they deal with everything from major breaking news to an awards show red carpet. And today we're going to be discussing how automation can help news teams deliver high quality content faster while also increasing collaboration between teams and broadcasters. I am delighted to be joined by two expert speakers as we consider how technology is transforming newsroom workflows. Liz Corbin is Director of News for the European Broadcasting Union, and Tom Crocker is Director of Business Development Production Workflows at Ross Video. Welcome both.
Thanks, Jenny. Hi.
Thank you.
Okay, first a bit of housekeeping for our viewers. There is a chat tab on screen should you need to reach out to the TVB Europe team if you have any technical issues during this session, but a browser refresh should get rid of the usual technical gremlins. I also want to point out that we have subtitles available on the platform. Just click on the CC button to add and you can select from a variety of languages. And there's a Q&A tab if you want to ask any of our panel questions. If we don't manage to get to your question today, we will try and follow up after the webinar. Okay, so I think we should start by asking Tom the obvious question. Tom, for the purpose of this discussion, can you explain what we mean by automation in the newsroom and what is it for?
Absolutely. So automation in the newsroom can mean a number of different things to a number of different people, but particularly when we're at Ross Video, we would typically talk about something like our overdrive solution. And what that seeks to do is basically make sure that if a tedious or repetitive task that is currently being done by a person who could be out doing some far more valuable journalism or something creative with their time can be taken over by a machine. And there are a couple of key planks that we talk about when we talk about automation. Typically, it would be certainly about organizational efficiency, using what resources you have in the best possible way, but also about complexity, being able to make very advanced things that would take a lot more people than maybe you have to produce, as well as efficiency, complexity, and repeatability is the third. Making sure that what you do is identical every single time and not interrupting a viewer experience because some titles or something like that come up at the wrong time and the coordination of a process isn't exactly where it should be. But fundamentally, it's about making sure that people do what people do best and machines do what machines do best.
Okay, so Liz, from a journalist's point of view, how does automation help you do your job?
What a big question, Jenny, and what a big topic. It's great to be here on the webinar discussing this because it really makes me think about automation, because I guess that's the point, actually. Automation is that once automation is embedded in your workflow, you actually forget it's there at all, which is the best kind of automation. So there are many things that we do in newsrooms now that previously would have had to be done manually, but this is something that's increasing all the time, and I think we're seeing a real rapid development in the types of tools that we can start using. And journalism is and should be, to a point, a very manual job in terms of the actual journalism itself, going out, finding out what happened, asking the right questions, having the unique and original thoughts about whatever story you're covering. But after that point, that's where automation can come in. Everything from the pictures or the audio that you're gathering, through to the processing of it, through to the delivery of it and the distribution of it. That's where automation can really help improve your product, help you reach more people, and really help the viewers and consumers to interact more with your content. So automation is absolutely critical. Just as you were just hearing there, that's where you can make scale, and that's where you can make quality in terms of your audience experience. But yes, really, it's the types of things that you forget. All of the down to computing systems that decades ago we didn't have. Have really escalated and made us faster. Yes, it's been critical.
It's good automation. You don't even realise that it's there, shall we say? That's probably
that's good automation.
Yeah. So how does it enable? I mean, what does it enable journalists and producers to do instead?
Think a little bit more, have time to actually work out what the story is, be able to, as I said, to produce your story in a way that will be the best way of presenting it to the audience you're dealing with. I mean, time is not on our side these days. The rolling news cycle, the speed at which news comes into you, the speed with which you have to put it back out again in a consumable, understandable form. We need some help with that. Yes, I suppose you could do it with hundreds and thousands of people, but actually some of these repetitive tasks are best done by machines. And whether that's in terms of the production, in terms of our the cameras or the delivery or the studio production, but also in terms of our we're now starting to think about all of the AI tools that are coming in and the big risks that may pose in future, in terms of the journalism, the meaning of our content.
Yeah, we'll talk about AI a little bit more in a few minutes. But Tom, how can automation help broadcasters and news teams do that? Classic phrase that we hear a lot of: "Do more for less."
Mm-hmm.
So, do more with less is a tricky term, and I've always felt a slightly unfair one. It's very difficult to realize. Do more with the same. It's a stretch. You can do that, or do the same with less. That's another approach that you can take. Doing more with less is extremely difficult. Now, that said, I think we can actually achieve that here, but it's important to frame what some of the problems facing certainly Ross's customers are and how they're doing that. Because really we're seeing, as Liz was saying, incredible pressure in the quantity of news that needs to be output, but also in the fine-tuning and finessing of that news to very specific markets, being able to sub-segment, talk much more directly and on a much more personal level. And that requires more fine-tuning and more actual journalism to take place. Now, one example that I often use is that nobody said as a child to their parents, when I grow up, I want to spend my evenings pushing the same fader the exact same distance 100 times over and over again. That's not a really useful thing, but it is something that often very talented people need to do in traditional news production environments, simply because the same program is happening. This mic needs to come down, this mic needs to go up, these lights need to come down, we need to swap this graphic to this graphic, when actually it's quite formulaic. Now, if you take those people who are very often trained journalists, skilled people in a number of different ways, and say, okay, well, let's let a machine push those buttons around. We know how this show is structured. We can tell a solution how to run this show from a technical state A to state B to state C type system. And let's have those people go out and generate more content and think more deeply about the news and generate things for different markets, generate things for different platforms, because another place where people need to do more is the multiplicity of outputs they're facing. There used to be a linear 6 o'clock, then there was a linear 24 hours, now there's that plus probably a different linear 24 hours, plus all of that needs to be repackaged, needs to be delivered to Facebook, Twitter, whatever platform is going to be the next one, TikTok. There'll be another one in a couple of years, I'm sure. And that churn's going to keep on going. And as those different markets adopt those different platforms with their own profiles, TikTok, for example, has a much younger audience than the 6 o'clock news does. So that needs to be repackaged, repurposed in order to make it relevant for that. So when we talk about doing more, it's more stories, but it's more stories to more places. But the core content and the core message of what that is still needs to be gone out and gathered, as Liz said, in a very manual, in a very human way. The story needs to be come up by a human. Machines are not at the stage where they build really great connections with an audience. They're trying, but I think everyone can tell it's not very good. It's not quality. It doesn't feel right. So people absolutely need to be involved in those processes, but there's a lot more of those processes happening simultaneously. If we can take the busy work away, that's where our customers who've gone all in on automation really find success and value.
So, can automation enable creativity?
I think it absolutely can, but by providing the space for people to do it. Computers are not creative. They don't have a creative bone in their bodies. They don't have a bone in their bodies, but they don't have creativity, and it's not something that AI can do. All it can do is take a lot of other people's creativity and try and pass it off as its own. So it's about creating space for humans to do their thing. But I'm sure Liz has some very good answers on this one as well.
Yeah, I mean, just going back to your more for less. I mean, it is a phrase, but I think it's a phrase that our newsrooms in our EBU members recognise quite a lot. They're expected to do substantially more, and in many cases, they're fighting inflation or they're fighting actual budget cuts. And so yes, they don't sit back and go, oh, we're just going to do less with less. And if I would say anything that automation has delivered in the newsrooms I've worked in is that you never go, I've got this great new tool, I'm just going to do things exactly the same as I always did them, but with fewer people. I'm just going to get the machine to do what the people were doing. No, you don't do that. You use the machines to do better, to do more, to do something that's more beautiful, that's cleverer, that's reaches the audience in a different and new way, and is surprising and creative, exactly as you were saying. Does automation allow you to be creative? I'd say the people are creative, but the machines deliver on your dream, on what you have imagined. And that's something, certainly over my 20 plus years working in newsrooms, I've really seen things that we found incredibly time consuming and difficult to do when they were first introduced. The idea of putting two pictures in boxes at the same time, two videos in boxes, I mean, was just, that was complicated. And now, you can do far beyond that. And so, yes, it is part of the creative process to be able to have a tool that will generate what you have imagined in your creative head. But in terms of doing more for less, no, this is always about, yes, budgets are being cut all the time, but still quality is improving. And that's because we're always seeking for new, better ways to do things.
Now, literally 5 years ago, I think it's next week, the way that news is produced changed fundamentally, and we started to see things like remote production and remote workflows arrive because of the pandemic. So how has automation become more important as remote workflows have been introduced into newsrooms? Liz?
I would just say, talking to exactly what I was just saying, which was that remote production was terrifying and scary and had to be done. Nobody during the pandemic chose to go down this route. I mean, it was dangerous in terms of the risks that they were taking with live output, but it proved a point. And then, over these last 5 years, people have then been able to develop really solid systems that allow them to produce far more than they were producing before in terms of different video and television services for different audiences at a completely different budget from what it had previously been assumed that you needed to have in order to produce such a quality broadcast. So yes, I mean, necessity breeds creativity, and also it really was an accelerator.
Yes.
and has really helped in many newsrooms. Many of the and I just gave the remote production is just one example. Of course, there are so many in terms of how we worked today. Nobody thought you could possibly put together a news report where you had the cameraman in one place, the editor in another, and the journalist somewhere else. I mean, that was inconceivable. It's perhaps not ideal, but it's certainly possible, and that's opened up, new avenues.
It's incredible, isn't it? I mean, we talk about this. Look at what we're doing today. Now, broadcasters don't necessarily use this platform, but it's not an issue now as a viewer to put the TV on and see somebody on the news talking down a video line, and that would never have happened 5 years ago because broadcasters felt that it wasn't good enough quality. And yet now, viewers and I think, obviously broadcasters, we all accept that this is now part of the way that we create television or even radio.
And of course, that's democratized what we have on air.
Yeah.
People that could previously not be on air because they were in a remote location or because they had family care issues or any types of issues which meant they couldn't be a contributor or an interviewee on a TV program or on a live stream or contributing to a webinar like this now can be, and there's nothing but good that has come from that.
Absolutely. So, Tom, here's a question for you. What would you say are the main recent developments in terms of technology that have led to changes in how news is produced?
There are so many of them. There are some quite heavy industrial ones, things like video over IP and all of its different forms. That means a number of different things, all the way from NDI up to 2110, and how video is routed about. I think the cloud and the adoption of that, that's been a really, really big one. Although there are certain places where cloud works very well. There are other places where it doesn't work quite so well. There are places where it represents tremendous value. There are places where it becomes very, very expensive, and other reasons need to be found for why you would be in the cloud and what systems you would put in the cloud and what you're hoping to achieve there. I remember talking about cloud back in 2018, 2019, and people were very, very nervous about it. Again, something that was accelerated by COVID. Everybody realized actually it's pretty safe up there. There were a lot of data security concerns. Will it be fast enough? Will it be scalable enough? In a lot of cases, particularly for things like NRCS's newsroom systems, where the data payload is relatively light, generally being text and various other kinds of messaging, maybe pictures, maybe a few videos, that kind of thing has gone into the cloud in a very, very big way. And that allows remote journalists, or indeed, we talk about remote journalists. Journalists have always been remote. They've always had to go out to get the news. The news isn't happening at the station. They've had to go out. What's changed with being able to put a newsroom in the cloud is that they don't have to come back in between. They can go from one story to another story to another story and keep the entire organization up to date with what's going on without needing to come back to offload what they've done. So that's been a huge thing. So yeah, cloud very much so, and almost everything we do can be put in the cloud if you want it there and if it suits you. But exactly which parts of which workflows should go in the cloud is still very much up in the air, and it's a very individual decision for a given broadcaster or content producer which parts of their workflow will work best for them in the cloud. So that's certainly one of the biggest. Moving on from there, of course, there's AI rustling in the weeds off to the side. A lot of people are very, very interested in it. But I don't know if everyone has every answer for where it goes. And there is a very dangerous question for serious news producers as to how involved that should be in a newsroom. And I think the answer to that is probably be very careful with it, and it certainly shouldn't be generating any news. I know that we've been demonstrating some AI features in Inception, our newsroom. We haven't released too many of them so far as products because we're really looking for a lot of feedback in how people want to use these things. But the first thing we developed was a mechanism that makes it very, very clear where AI has touched anything, exactly what it's done, so that everything is traceable, everything can be rolled back, and everyone can understand exactly what's been done. So, for example, if you used it to reduce a predicted read time of a script from 42 seconds to 36 seconds, which is one of the features that we've demonstrated, it will show you exactly what it changed. It will allow you to roll back. It's very easy to browse through because we need to be very, very careful with what we do with it.
Yeah. It's fascinating. We will talk more about AI in a few minutes, but I want to ask about technologies such as 5G and the impact that they're having on live news production. Is 5G something that you're using much at EBU, Liz?
Well, in terms of transmission, this has fundamentally changed our industry over the last 20 years. It's not a recent thing, but of course, as the speed of the mobile networks and the quality of them improves, and as we come into 5G, we're really talking about a much more reliable system. I mean, news has always been at the sharp end of these types of technologies. But at the EBU, we've always also been at the very high end in terms of expectations, in terms of delivery, must never fail, must never drop a transmission. And so it's always been part of our suite of services, but it's playing an increasing role. And being able to be live from anywhere with a tiny little device goes exactly to what Tom was saying about, people are always on the road. They never need to come back to base. Slightly risky, but they have this opportunity to be live wherever they want to be live, and not having to go to a particular feed point or having to find an SNG, and the cost of this is also substantially reduced. So yes, this is something a service that we offer to our many members and other clients who take broadcast services from us, and which we do with, our tolerance for risk is very low in terms of we will always make sure that we deliver. But this has transformed our industry, and all for the better in terms of being able to get the news to audiences quicker.
Yeah, I know
from the relevant location as well.
Yes, I know it was used a lot, obviously, during the coronation of King Charles a couple of years ago, and it was also used a lot during the US elections last year, because you can just get a reporter out there with a camera and a connection. I do, like you said, I think it is definitely democratizing what broadcasters can do with, as we said, do more for less. So I find 5G quite a fascinating thing. The other thing, of course, that's having a big impact is IP. And Tom mentioned IPMX and SMPTE 2110. How much of an impact is that now having on speeding up newsroom workflows, Tom?
That depends on where you implement it. I think at the lower end, and by lower end, I mean really not 2110, it's having much more of a democratizing effect. It's allowing people to generate more beautiful, more complicated programs at a much lower price point, which I think is very, very interesting. It is a lot of that, and many of those things. So things like SRT, for example, have been absolutely vital in enabling those remote productions we've been talking about in concert with 5G, to deliver in a sensible and predictable way and deal with a lot of the instabilities and insecurities and quality concerns that broadcasters have, and to make those work in a sensible way over open networks and bring prices down effectively. At the higher end, 2110 can be fantastic. and where certainly larger broadcasters have implemented it as a backbone technology in their facilities, being able to route video around a facility very, very freely and flexibly, be able to send that to the other studio instead of the first studio, that kind of thing, all in that quality has been fantastic. 2110 is it has its own complexities and challenges with it. It's a different way of achieving something that can be really good. I don't think we've reached the end of what it's capable of. And when you look at things like what can be done with the metadata and the number of tracks and carriers that you can put down an Ethernet cable, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff in the future for it. That's also where automation, to bring us back to that, needs to really have a handle on this. And in 5G, we now have so many more feeds and so much scope to bring more feeds in from more places, more files in. We have remote journalists sending things in. So what we're seeing is a lot of media hubs dealing with huge quantities of media, and that needs tagging, it needs organization, it needs routing to the right people at the right time in the right places, which means it needs the right tags on it needs the right identifiers, it needs a system to be able to pluck out from an enormous haystack of different feeds and streams going in different directions and give those to the right people in the right way at the right time. I know a lot of different customers who are trying to solve these problems with varying levels of success. I think we're going to see a lot more new solutions approaching the way of managing all of this stuff over the next few years, which I think is very exciting.
So, Tom, in terms of what would you say is the biggest challenge in terms of accommodating new technology into the newsroom workflows, and how do you meet that?
The biggest challenge, honestly, is that newsroom staff know their jobs and they know the tool set that's in front of them and they like that tool set because that's what they've been working on, often for a very long time. And turning up and saying, okay, I know you're busy. You're a journalist. Of course you're busy. You're doing more with less. You're extremely busy. I think I know a better way for you to do this, but you're going to have to slow down for a while. You're going to have to use something you're unfamiliar with. And for the first 3 months, you're probably not going to like it because the button's not where it was in the old one and it does things in a different way. So really, it's a human thing. It's explaining why this new way of doing something is better than the old way of doing something, particularly when the old way of doing something might work. Often something works great for a journalist, but is let's say a CTO's worst nightmare because this system doesn't talk to this system and they can't get these numbers back and they don't understand what's happening here and all of that feedback and that kind of thing. So sometimes you need to change how one person does things in order to save someone else time or to make the organization more efficient as a whole. Now, I don't think we ever do that while simultaneously presenting a worse outcome to anyone involved in that process. But there is a time of change and learning, and things are different. Once upon a time, my mother-in-law reorganized our kitchen. I didn't like that at all. Nothing was where it was supposed to be. It is a little bit like that. There is a change. Actually, it turned out better, and she was right, which was painful to admit. But there was a process of a bit of daily irritation until we got used to it. And it is that technology has moved on. We have a different way of doing things. And getting the whole team in an organization aligned behind that and bought into what the final outcome is actually the most challenging part of the whole process.
Liz, as a journalist, do you have a counterpoint to that, or do you want to agree about?
Oh no, look, I agree with quite a lot of it. But journalists are traditionally pretty hard to please. I mean, their job is not to be pleased all the time. Their job is to question and to challenge and to want to do things as quickly and as brilliantly as possible. And if something's going to slow them down in any way or get in the way of doing that, then they're not very interested. I would also say, while there are some brilliant journalists who are very technically minded, there are also a good number of journalists who, they would have, if they were good at technology, that would have been which their industry that they would have gone into, but they didn't. They went into journalism, and it's different. So I would say I would disagree, Tom, that they love the tools that they use currently. They hate the tools they use currently, but they don't hate them as much as the new tool that you're going to make them use.
I give you that completely. I'm not disagreeing with that in any way.
So yeah, there's nothing worse than changing the technology in a 24-hour newsroom, because the fact is, it is difficult, and it's, to be fair, people don't hate it for the sake of hating it. They hate it because it makes their life more difficult. It makes their output less good for a little while. And, and when it causes you to fall off air or causes something to go wrong on air, that's deeply frustrating. So, yeah, introducing new technology in a newsroom, I think, is very different to introducing a new technology in other professions and other environments. But it is like any 24/7 operation. It can't fail. Failure is not an option.
Yeah.
And little failures and little bumps, okay, we all get through them. But this is why it is really difficult. And having been involved in a number of technology changes directly myself, it's critical that those editorial leaders and technology leaders work hand in hand and have deep respect for each other, because where it goes wrong is where they're not listening to each other, and they don't hear from the editorial side, which is obviously my perspective, why that's going to cause a problem, and why, no, it can't be done like that, or we need to find another way. And likewise, from the editorial side, really needs to listen to the technology side about why it's not possible to do it like that, or why this change must happen. And I would say the vast majority of the time this works really well. But where that communication, there can be a divide, or a fence that's hard to get over in between those two sides of the operation, and that's where it's absolutely critical to get it right.
Yeah. Okay, so you both have mentioned this so far, but everyone, of course, in the industry is talking about AI at the moment.
Yes.
Now, I appreciate artificial intelligence has been part of workflows for a long time, and it's generative AI that is the new thing, the new kid on the block. But do either of you think news will ever integrate generative AI into its workflows?
It already is.
List?
It already is.
Oh, okay.
But generative, you're right to make the distinction, because of course AI has been helping us for years, and is part of all of the automation that we've just been discussing. But generative AI, particularly in terms of the large language models, is where the real major shift for our side of the industry is coming. And it brings enormous opportunity, but fundamental risks. So if we think the advent of social media in terms of distribution, seriously disrupted the way news is distributed and how people get access to news, this is going to be, I predict several thousand times more disruptive than that was. And so we approach it with caution, but also with an open mind to making sure that we are staying ahead with it. Can't just stick our heads in the sand and pretend it's not happening. And as I said, yes, there are already examples, and I might just give you a few just to explain where this really can be of huge advantage. So something we're doing, for example, across the EBU, of course, in Europe, we have many, many languages. And so generative AI used to do basic translation. But, translation of journalistic content is never basic. You translate a sentence, you can translate directly or indirectly, you interpret it, you distort it, and you risk the journalism in that. But something that we've done is we've brought together more than 30 EBU members and partners and brought all of their online content, both text and audio and video, into one platform, automatically translated that, enabling our journalists to be able to read the content of other members in a way that they could never do before. If you have a story that's affecting people across Europe, let's say you have a flooding story that's running across several countries in Central Europe, certainly happened in the last couple of years. If you search Google for FLOOD, flood, you're not going to turn up the article in Czech and Romanian and Hungarian, and you're not going to find that content. So this is a tool that can really help us with our news gathering, and really help us to be quicker in sharing and being more efficient between our different newsrooms. Another example, something that Radio France did, they put into production. They had an interview with the new French Prime Minister organised for lunchtime. And they decided to use their entire network of regional, local radio stations to ask the public, if you had got to speak to the Prime Minister, what question would you ask? And they did this across their 30 different radio stations in the morning, I think between 9 and 10. And the interview was at lunchtime. They recorded all of those. They put it all into a summarizer, and they managed to summarize what all of these callers into the radio station had managed to say. So, there are things that you would never are not humanly possible that are possible with generative AI. Another thing that people are experimenting with, which is much more a bit riskier, is summaries and headlines. So to have written your article, or to have your audio piece or your video, and to summarize that into a headline to make sure that you've got the best SEO, or that you've got the right length that you need for your particular publication. That can be really, really helpful. It can also be risky because these generative AI tools, they speak brilliant English if you're working in English, and something that's imperfect English makes you less likely to really question it. Is that really the story? Is that the best summary of what I'm trying to say? And then, of course, in smaller languages, it's much, much harder, and the tools are not as advanced. And we don't want our members in countries which have fewer numbers of people speaking their language to fall behind because the tools are not as advanced in those languages. Well, sorry, a long answer, but there's so much going on, but so much caution also to be had.
Absolutely. Well, I just wanted to pick up on something there, because you talked about accuracy. So how can AI help news teams in terms of accuracy and style?
So a real practical example that we're looking into currently is we use a style guide. As almost every newsroom has a style guide. It's how you spell. Do you spell Zelensky with 2 Y's or 1 Y? And every newsroom has their own guidance for that. Well, what if you could feed the AI tool your style guide, and then you run each of your stories through that, and does it meet the style guide? And that would be incredibly helpful, particularly for us. We have the way our Eurovision News Exchange works is that we have all the content sent in from all of our members to then exchange back out. And of course, they all have their own style guides. So it comes into us in their style, we convert it into our style, and then we push it back out again. Well, there's something surely that automation can help us with there. But we also want to make sure that we do that in a safe way, because the possibility of introducing errors is something that we need to absolutely fundamentally avoid. So it's a matter of testing and being certain that we can do this in a safe way.
There is a feeling I feel at the moment that AI is great in what it can do at the moment. But you still need a human to actually sit there and check what it's done.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
sorry,
yeah.
Far quicker to read something than to write something. So in that case, an improvement is still happening in terms of the time available.
Absolutely.
But I go back to the point. So this human in the loop, it obviously is it is critical to have a human in the loop of whatever process you're doing. Maybe you're using AI to help you, but there should be a human in the loop. Well, humans are inherently positive biased, as in they think things, they tend to be optimistic. So humans tend to think it's probably fine. There are a few pessimists amongst us, but generally we anticipate that something will be fine. And if something is written, as I said, if you're using text, if something is written beautifully, perfectly, in exactly the style that you wanted it to be, then the chances of you spotting the slight nuance that isn't correct are much lower, because you just think it's probably fine. And so that human in the loop, I don't like to use the word lazy. They're not lazy, but they do have this kind of bias toward this positivity bias that causes them to not spot mistakes in something that's otherwise looks beautiful and clean. So for me, this is something that's going to become really very difficult.
No. Is there a way that either of you see AI adding value for audiences?
I think there are several ways it will do that. One of them is in, and again, it will have to be checked. Of course, it will, but it's in the personalization of content. It is in changing a given story, for example, into something that suits a different market. So the version of a story that you might see in the Financial Times might well be interesting to 16 to 19-year-olds if phrased in the right way, but it won't be the same way as it's written about in the FT.
Yes.
So there's a lot of that kind of thing that AI could potentially do to bring things closer to people. There are other things in terms of, one of the great places where people are trying to find value in AI is in content tagging and retrieval. So having something look through, identify people, identify places, spaces, objects, tone, and being able to pull things out of an archive that are the best possible references that contribute to that story in the best possible way as quickly as possible. So using AI to suggest content to add to stories that you might not otherwise have been able to find. Also in things like verification, this clip that's been submitted, where did this come from? Has this ever turned up anywhere else ever? That's the kind of thing that AI can help with. It can flag if something, it's often, I have seen experiments where it is used to see if footage or photos have been digitally manipulated. So in content verification, it also can have a role to play. So in terms of quality and precision of messaging, I think AI has several roles to play. Whether it's ready for that yet, I don't know, but I think this is the beginning of quite a long journey.
Okay.
I agree. I think the benefit to audiences could well be exponential, as in the way that you consume media in future will be fundamentally different to how you experience it today, which is hopefully a good thing. Just to give you another example, something that just launched very recently as a pilot on the Swedish radio app. So any Swedish speakers amongst your audience may already be familiar with this, but it's other news organisations are experimenting too. There's a chat where you can ask Swedish radio about the news on their site. So Swedish radio inevitably has a lot of audio content, so it's searching the audio for the answers, not just text for the answers. And this is a collaboration again with the EBU. This chat assistant is something that we call Neo, and it's been training a chat assistant on a distinct data source rather than just searching the entire web. Really distinguishes it from the other chat assistants that are already out there at the moment and are scraping content from goodness knows where and serving you up with goodness knows what in terms of what they confidently describe as news. And this is where I think things are going, that you will have a more interactive experience with your news provider, where you can get the answers in a way that you find it easier to understand to the very specific questions that you have, and you don't have to keep going searching for that. You can literally just ask for it. And then I would also just add, in terms of the impact it's already having, many of our members are now being able to provide more accessible news services, so more subtitling, more audio description, all of these types of services that they were already providing, but not at such a scale, and the AI tools are really able to help them scale. And then finally, back to languages. You want a Ukrainian service? You can just kind of create a Ukrainian service, but even if you only have 1 or 2 Ukrainian speakers, because you can use the tools to do that, the Ukrainian speakers can check it, and bam, you've got a Ukrainian service, which is what a number of our, over the last 3 years, a number of our members have done.
Yeah. Great. I have one more question for you before we'll open it up to the audience. So we talked about AI there, but what other technologies are you paying attention to at the moment that could impact, either the technology side or the editorial side of the newsroom in the next couple of years? Tom?
We've touched on them. The ones that I spend time talking about are AI, automation, of course. It is the 5G and the remote stuff. It is the cloud, and particularly combinations of all of the above. To effectively, there are so many options as to how to do these things. It becomes a very individual choice for a given content producer as to how best to mix those things up to optimize their organization and what their goals are in the best possible way. At the moment, there is so many different ways of doing things that everyone has to navigate this for themselves. And it's a very, very exciting time. And where people end up, you have entire broadcasters who spring up based on nothing that anyone who worked in an engineering room 10 years ago would recognize as broadcast equipment. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah, cool. And Liz, anything that you're paying attention to?
I would just say that anything that makes us quicker, faster, that we more lightweight, easier to operate, that anybody can operate. I think that's been a big change as well in recent years, is that more of this technology now is easier for non-technical staff to be able to operate, and leaving the technical staff to do the really complex stuff. And that's where some of the increase in quality has come from, because you can, journalists can do a bit more on the technical side, and leaving the real wizards to do their magic. But no, I would agree with Tom in terms of the areas that we're looking at, and AI, and that's what it's all about at the moment.
Absolutely. It's funny, isn't it? I'm a journalist. I spend my time writing about technology, but I am the least technological person you'll ever meet. So
I just don't believe that, and I don't think any other people watching do either. We'll take your word for it, Jenny, on this occasion.
Trust me. All right, look, that's all. That's it for my questions today. Let's have a look at some from our audience. Robert asks, are there other areas of production where you see automation playing a bigger role? Tom?
Yeah, I mean, studio automation is of course one of the very, very large ones. The other place where people are trying to get it to work is in media processing, in media handling, in metadata, because there's so much value to be had in that. It's a very big challenge for people to solve, particularly when you've got large established broadcasters with a long history, with millions upon millions upon millions of hours of archive that they want to get value from. However you slice that, it's going to be expensive and lengthy, even for an AI to work out everything that's on all of those tapes. But it's a very exciting possibility for what people will find in there. So certainly in that and then in the subsequent retrieval of that, in processing inbound media for an editor to put it together in the quickest possible way. And note, I'm still referring to an editor as a human, because then we start to cross the line into AI actually generating news, because editors absolutely color the story that they're cutting together. So I'm not necessarily advocating that, even though a quick Google search will show you 1,000 providers that will cut video together automatically for you. I don't think that's the direction. I hope that's not the direction news goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, 2 years ago, I saw for the first time saw an automation system that could take a 90-minute football match, identify all the goals, all the corners, all the free kicks, all the red and yellow cards, and could, with a synthetic voice, produce a match report. I mean, it's not that it's not possible. Whether it's desirable or not is another question, but this technology can help us speed up and support our production. Sport is a good example, because in terms of that is something that's fairly repetitive in terms of being able to train the models on, but there's also an absolute art. A brilliant sports report, a brilliant match report is a piece of art if you listen to it or watch it. The scripting that goes with it, and the editing that accompanies that script really help. But also, go back to the shooting of the football match in terms of how that was shot, the cameras that were used, how those cameras were brought together for the feed, how that feed was then distributed. There's automation every part of this production. So,
and to add a thought to the sports one, I doubt we'll see much of that kind of thing looking at top division sports. But for much more local, lower tiered divisions, which didn't previously have the budget or the market to be able to film their games, get match reports from them, that door was closed to them. They weren't bringing in OB vans. That wasn't feasible, because there's only 3,000 people in that town and only 200 of them want to watch the match. But if you can get automation to do that kind of thing, that is a lot more than they have today. And that becomes a viable proposition when you bring in automation in quite a heavy way there. Not for the top flight, absolutely, but it's democratization again. We can now bring these things to those who want to watch them.
Yeah, minority sports, minority news stories, local news stories. This is all helping. I saw an example once in the US, where some local media organizations have to provide the readout from the police of the various police incidents that happen in that town. That's one of their obligations. They have to provide it. Well, previously that meant a journalist listening to the police tape and writing, making a note, writing a report, and now they've automized all of that, because it's just it's not something that they want to spend their time on. They want to spend their time doing more meaningful journalism. So there are many areas, but I think hyper local and minority interests are a real opportunity here.
As someone who started her career working in a radio station where I would have to call up a very well-known police department's incident line and note down all of what had happened and what was to be, whether we were going to cover it or not, I think any automation of that, personally, I find is a very good idea.
But I did exactly the same.
Okay. Well, look, unfortunately, I think that's all we have time for today. Please, everyone, join me in thanking our brilliantly expert panelists, Liz Corbin and Tom Crocker. Now, if you joined us slightly late, this webinar will be available on demand soon, and we'll send you a link to that once it's available. But just to say from me, as always, keep an eye on tvbeurope.com for all the latest industry news, as well as future webinar announcements, and we'll see you again soon.